Hello, everyone. I'm Rivera Jr., and you're watching Rights Watch. All right. As we all know, we're supposed to be living in the 21st century. Technology has advanced to the point where people with disabilities no longer have to rely on government assistance to survive. They can thrive and they can work. And thanks to the incredible advancements in technology, like those things we call computers, many of them can now do their jobs from home just as efficiently, if not more efficiently, than from the inconvenience of a government office. I used to be proud of the VA's broad offering of telework arrangements. They weren't just about convenience. They gave people access to employment who otherwise wouldn't have it. They improved work-life balance, boosted morale, and actually increased productivity. But unfortunately, this administration seems to be allergic to progress. Just like with other policies we've seen, it refuses to acknowledge that we are living in a new era, and instead, it's dragging us backwards. Now, the VA is putting up with new hurdles, ending teleworking agreements for thousands of federal workers and introducing guidelines that force disabled employees to prove that they still deserve access to telework. Before we begin, we would love to have your support in the fight for federal labor. So please go ahead and hit that like button. Share this video with everybody that you know, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Your support helps us bring these important conversations to light. All right, now back to the topic. All of this makes me wonder, what's really going on here? Is this just about policy, or is it about pushing people out the door? Joining me today to help us break it all down is federal employee rights attorney Andrew Weeks. Andrew, we missed you in the last couple of episodes, but we're so glad to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me back. It's been a few weeks. It feels like a few years with everything going on, but I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, brother. We're so glad to have you again. All right, so I want to start with the basics on telework. Telework has opened the doors for so many federal employees, especially those with disabilities. Andrew, can you walk us through how telework typically looks like and it's implemented in the government setting?
Well, it can be implemented in a variety of different ways. Of course, you can be on full telework as a reasonable accommodation, or you can be on some sort of partial telework, maybe where you telework 2 days a week and go into the office 3 days a week. Essentially, with telework, the most important thing is that it doesn't interfere with an essential function of your job, right? So if you can telework and do your job, then that is a reasonable accommodation that we need to accommodate people on with disabilities that require that. If you are a charge nurse in the emergency room, you can't telework, right? That essential function of your job is being in the emergency room helping patients, right? So you wouldn't be able to telework. So when we're talking about telework as a reasonable accommodation, we're not talking about people not being able to do their jobs because they're teleworking and they're just sitting at home. We're talking about people who have jobs. Maybe their job involves being on the phone, they're administrative, they're on the computers. We're not talking about people who are treating patients, and if they telework, then their job's not going to get done. That wouldn't be a reasonable accommodation. That person wouldn't be able to do that job. They need to be there supporting our veterans.
Right. And you know, as a nurse, I not every job, like you said, is eligible for telework. Like, for example, if I look at my employee file, somewhere around there, I'm going to find that it says not eligible for telework. So Not everybody is eligible for it, but I think we saw an increase on teleworking arrangements close to 2019, 2020 when COVID started to hit, when we had to get people out of buildings that weren't necessarily had to be in there and that we could afford to have work from home. So we started to see an increase on teleworking during that period. And what I noticed is that a lot of these positions started to gradually transform into telework eligible, or they came as part of their job description. It would say telework eligible, which was something that wasn't necessarily very easy to find. It came to a point where a lot of these positions, the government agreed that, actually, we can afford to have these people working from home because it helps in different ways. So we've come a long way since 2020. In today's world, telework's no longer just a perk. It's become a gateway for equal access for people with chronic conditions, with physical disabilities, mental health needs, or even injuries. But it feels like instead of advancing, now the VA is trying to roll back, to roll the clock back. Here's what's happening. Previously, many federal jobs offered partial or even full-time telework arrangements as part of their normal duties. But now the VA stipulates that only those with reasonable accommodations. Now, this is important because before this, you didn't necessarily need to have reasonable accommodations for telework, but now they're making it a requirement to require this reasonable accommodation for qualifying disabilities. So you can work from home. These require the approval that includes for any reasonable accommodation that includes more than 8 weeks of recurrent telework. They're also doing a 90-day retroactive review of every accommodation involving telework granted this year. They said it's about ensuring accommodations that are still necessary. But, Andrew, let's be real. Is this really a genuine effort to review the effectiveness, or is this just a new layer of red tape? What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are it appears to be red tape because people who have in-office jobs, in-person jobs that, as you know, and probably most of the viewers here know, there's a difference between a remote position and a telework position, right? So telework, you can go into the office, you might come and telework 2 days a week, 3 days a week, maybe it is 5 days a week. A remote position is we hired you and you are going to handle the customer service phones or whatever phones they are from your house, and we're going to send you the equipment, and you were never intended to come into the office. So there's a difference between those. What I've seen is a lot of people who have serious disabilities are in jobs that they can definitely perform the reasonable or the essential functions of their job with telework. And all of a sudden they've been on these accommodations for years, and they're being reviewed ever since January 2025. And for some of them, it was indicated that they were not going to be able to continue teleworking despite their disability. I got involved on some of these cases, and then we were able to get them their reasonable accommodations for some of these people, not all. So it is red tape, though, because when you look at that memo, now they're going to review it every year. Annual reviews. Now it's got to go to a higher level. It's not just your reasonable accommodations coordinator conferring with your immediate manager, immediate supervisor, making sure that whatever accommodation, telework or otherwise, is going to allow you to perform the essential functions of your job and is reasonable. Now it's got to go to the next level. It's got to go to the SES. Are we going to the medical director now, who's busy and has all these things on their desk that they're going through? And this is one more. It does seem like now there's going to be more red tape and delay, and we're not making it efficient to get these telework accommodations for people who need them. Again, we're talking about people who need them, who are able to do their job with these accommodations.
Right. And we're making it so hard now for people that, like you said, like really need it. And, I know many people that have been in telework for years, not necessarily under reasonable accommodation, that now they require it. And, some of the things I'm hearing is that many people with disabilities at this time have not had their request for an RA for telework reviewed yet. And this is a big issue for me, Andrew, because I'm wondering if they're potentially delaying these requests in an effort to just keep them there for now. And I'm just wondering, Andrew, and this is a question for you. Do you think that timeliness is a factor that may trigger a potential violation to employee rights?
Yeah, I think if you need a reasonable accommodation and there's a long delay getting you that accommodation, that's a violation of the Rehab Act. Yeah, that definitely raised legal issues, further litigation and further liability, which does not make things more efficient. I think we all agree, like, whatever your personal beliefs are on telework, which there are studies that prove that certain amounts of telework do make workforces more efficient and morale better, and you get more work done. But all that aside, if we're bringing people back into the office, that's fine. Bring people back in the office. But we have this exception. This exception was carved out because A, it's required by law, and at least it was carved out for people with disabilities to get a reasonable accommodation for telework if they could still perform the essential functions of their job with that accommodation. That's there for a purpose, and any sort of delay is going to have a negative impact and potentially cause liability in violation of the Rehab Act.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this opens so many different venues that agencies can actually probably inadvertently discriminate against employees. And this is another one of my concerns. We hear the administration say things like, we want the best people working for the government, right? This is one of the things that we commonly hear when this administration refers to government employees. Now, people have to realize that the government is not just, the services that you commonly associate with security, right? Like if there's somebody that works in security, then they need to be medically fit to be able to perform those job duties. If somebody works in nursing, they'd have to be medically fit to be able to perform the duties. I'd have to go through some kind of testing that they do to make sure that I'm able to lift, I'm able to do all these different things so that I can complete the job that I'm assigned to. But there's a lot of jobs in the federal government that really, by you being teleworking, it doesn't affect the bottom line. It doesn't affect the essential work of the government. But the way that they're filtering telework, it's almost like they're saying you can work here, but only if you fit the mold, right? I don't think it's fair that employees have to prove that their disability qualifies them for telework, especially if they have to go every year and reapply, and it places so much burden on the employees. It causes so much stress knowing that, the time is coming up. I have to show again that I have this disability, that I need to remain on telework. It seems like the agency can filter which conditions they consider to be telework worthy. Andrew, am I overthinking this by thinking this could be potentially a form of discrimination?
Well, it's like, no, I don't think so. I think it's how are they going to apply this memorandum? You and I were talking about the memorandum by the new secretary. I think it was the June 5th memorandum where he discusses all this. It's how are they going to apply it? Who's going to be making this decision? There's a reasonable inquiry into the impact of the disability in the reasonable accommodations process. That there's forms you fill out that your doctor has to fill out. That's already there. These people are already vetted. They're not just handing out reasonable accommodation requests, or they're not just granting these telework requests to anybody and everybody. You literally have to have a doctor already fill out this information and fill out the VA forms to get this done, or whatever forms for whatever agency you're with. So I think the extra layer of scrutiny, it depends on how it's being applied. Is it just that your doctor's saying, yeah, nothing's changed with his disability, he still needs it? Maybe that's fine, right? Is that extra red tape, and could that still cause problems? Maybe. But if we're doing a whole analysis and you're requiring an extra layer beyond the reasonable inquiry, that's a violation of the Rehab Act. Again, that's going to open up claims. So Yeah, I don't want to comment on what you just said at the beginning of that spiel about how this administration says they want the best, but I'm going to go ahead and do it because I'm dealing with a lot of people with reduction in forces. I'm dealing with a lot of people who are being fired for allegedly having some sort of DEIA issue. And there's people who had DEI work who were white who aren't being fired. There's people who did DEI work who are black who are being fired. It seems like this whole we're firing people who did DEI is being not applied in a neutral manner. And I think when this, and you can even see it from the appointments, the political appointments we're seeing, the kind of people they're appointing and their qualifications, that when they say we want the best, they don't actually mean the best qualified. They mean most like me, right? Rich, white, conservative.
Right. Right. We've seen that on I don't know if I discussed it with you on the questions that now they want to add to the interview process for some employees on where their loyalties lie when it comes to the federal government and the president's agenda. Right. So it really and there's a reason why I made that comment. Right. And it's because when you're talking about the best people, right, and you have a certain type of person in mind, right, and it seems like to me when you start screening and people have to start and you make it a requirement that people start to have to reprove that their disability qualifies them for telework, right? It's another layer, it's another type of screening that employees have to go through that gives the agency sufficient information that they can later on potentially, right? And I'm not saying this is what's happening, these are just my thoughts, right? But that they can potentially look at this and say, well, I got all these people that want to work from home because they've got some kind of conditions. I don't want anybody with this type of condition. And it just opens the door for some type of future, any further legal problems down the line, right? So that's my main concern when I mentioned that comment about what the government says about hiring the best people is that they already have the type of people they want in mind, right? And
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head with that, Danny. You hit the nail on the head.
right, and I think they're making it obvious that people with disabilities don't necessarily fit the mold, right? So, but anyways, I don't want to go into a whole rant about that, but these are just my thoughts on that topic, right?
That might be another podcast that we have to discuss.
That might be another one, right? But here's another thing. A lot of employees are being told no telework, but we can give you something else, right? And a lot of employees are applying for these reasonable accommodations, especially those that were already on telework agreements. And once they apply, they're saying, we're not going to give you telework, but we're going to offer you another type of reasonable accommodation. That could be a desk lamp, a parking spot, adjusted hours. I have people that, they want to offer like headphones, a different office space, which I will argue on that. Right now, agencies don't really have the space for having all these people coming back to the agencies, and at least the agency that I work for, we have people just cramped in places that you would never imagine. It looks more like a call center than an actual government office right now.
And I mean, if I can comment on that for a second, Danny, you're absolutely right. Two things. The first is that actually, if there is a reasonable accommodation other than telework, and we can make that work, and it will actually help my client and help them be able to come into the office and perform the essential functions of their job, I'm going to encourage my client to take that. Uh, if there is a stand-up, sit-down desk, and you can get an assistant or somebody to help you lift heavy things, and you can get a parking spot closer by, or you can take frequent breaks, and FMLA can be part of your reasonable accommodation, right? Is being able to have intermittent FMLA to take breaks to stand up and walk around if your back's hurting or something. So yeah, if there's something and it will truly help them and help them be able to come into the office, then absolutely I'm going to encourage them to take that, and that's appropriate. It's not always the case though. It's not always the case. And the second thing on your second point is no, absolutely a lot of these agencies don't. I mean, a lot of these buildings, I have offices in Louisville and DC. I go back and forth from Louisville to DC a lot. And in DC, some of these buildings are falling apart. Some of these buildings have serious mold issue. If my partner Whitney was on here, she would tell you about her own personal experience from when she worked at agencies and the state of those buildings and the mold and allergies and the issues. I mean, the FBI building right now has nets hung up all around the building so it can catch pieces of the roof falling off so it doesn't hurt people below. I mean, no, we're not set up for people to come right back in the office. There needs to be some investment in the infrastructure to get people back in the office. And by investment, I don't mean relocating everything out of DC, because I think that there is an advantage to having offices grouped together and your agencies all in a central location in this capital. That's the purpose of a capital, to have these interagency interactions, meetings, and things going on. That, no, I don't think you can move headquarters of all these different agencies all across America to punish DC. That's not the solution. But you did hit the nail on the head. I don't think we're equipped for everyone to come in. But be that as it may, if you actually have a disability, no, like, and the best reasonable accommodation is the telework, and you're able to perform the essential functions of your job. That's what we need to be doing.
Right. And that's very reassuring, because that's one of the things we've been doing, at least at SU Union, at our standpoint. I'm always advising people, if they're offering you some kind of accommodation, take it. Because the problem is that if you refuse it, they're not going to go back and say, well, okay, we'll give you we'll give you telework. No, they're trying to demonstrate that they're trying to work with you in some way. So my suggestion to people is, take it, and if it doesn't work, then you can go back and have them revise it. But the initial offers, I think they should always, like you said, they should always be taken, and just to make sure, right? Because then they can come back and argue and say, well, we're trying to help you out, and you're not helping yourself, right? Things like that can come up in the future.
If they're help, I mean, I think also people need to, in these processes, because getting a reasonable accommodation with the federal government, it's not a simple process. There's a lot of forms, there's a lot of steps, there's a reasonable accommodations coordinator, there's a lot of red tape. And I think that, if you're a union member, you need to be reaching out to your union rep, someone like you, Danny, to help guide through the process, or reach out to an attorney. I'm not saying someone like me or another attorney that specializes in federal employment law. There's good attorneys that do this work, that are out here trying to fight for the people, and get in touch with one of those and try to see if they can help guide you through the process. And like I've said, I think sometimes in the recent days, just getting an attorney can help you get the RA when they know an attorney's involved, because then they're like, do I really want to deal with now the litigation and all this that's going to happen if I don't give them the accommodation? Maybe we'll go ahead. I've not gotten people new accommodations this way, but people where they're trying to take away their telework accommodation they've had for years, I've saved it, and they've let it go and been like, okay, we'll let you have this accommodation. They might have added in a little more in office time or something like that, which is fine. And I tell the clients, like, no, that's part of your job. If part of your job is to do X, Y, and Z, and that requires being in person, then you're going to go in person and do that, or this is not the job for you. They're going to have to look for an alternative job, which right now there's a hiring freeze and there's all sorts of issues. So the whole looking for alternative work as a reasonable accommodation is not the same as it was a year ago. We'll just leave it at that.
Right. It's a little difficult. And if you're going to look for an attorney, you really want a good attorney. So Andrew's not going to say it, but I will. You should call Andrew, because you want people that really care and are on your side. So just a little tidbit in there. But hey, Andrew, this really feels more, at some points and sometimes these reasonable accommodations don't work. And at times it really feels like, like a doctor putting a Band-Aid on a bleeding artery, right? You can cover it all you want, but without the pressure, it's not going to stop the bleeding, right? So what I'm trying to say is, some of these accommodations don't even necessarily address the needs of the employee. And sometimes they'll offer them anyways, just to check that box, and said that they say that they offered something. So these alternate accommodations, I'm pretty sure, and I think you'd agree that they're probably legally valid. But how can they be challenged if they don't actually meet the expectations of the employees, or actually not the expectations, but the needs of the employee?
Well, I mean, if they're not meeting your needs, then you have to say they're not meeting my needs. This is the accommodation I need, and you're going to have to go through that process. When I tell you that, when you say they're checking a box, that's true. They're trying to check a box because they know they might end up in a deposition or hearing. I've deposed and questioned at hearing multiple reasonable accommodation coordinators. Whitney, my partner, and Whitney and I have. And yeah, they're thinking about that. Like, I just got to check the box. They're taking actions to trap you, to check the box, so that they're protected, so that ultimately they can deny the reasonable accommodation of telework. And I don't know this, but I suspect that this was happening before January 2025. Okay. So I think it's gotten worse? I do. But like, this was a problem before January 2025 with telework as a reasonable accommodation. This has been an ongoing problem. I'm not pinning this one just on this administration. This is a problem. This has been a problem I've been looking into and seeking to address. With the way that they're administering these RAs and their actual good faith or bad faith about it.
Yeah, and I think it's just a little more apparent now because, you've got such a large group of people that now didn't necessarily need reasonable accommodations, and now they do. And now agencies are having an influx of reasonable accommodation requests, and they just have to check the boxes. So you're right. This was an issue before. Now it's just in a larger scale, and this is why this, leads me to believe that. Now, attention to all union leaders, labor defenders, and businesses of all kind. Do you ever struggle to stay connected with your members? Have trouble keeping track of your cases? Or just feel overwhelmed trying to juggle files, deadlines, and communication all at once? Trust me, I've been there. That's exactly why I created Riversites. Riversites wasn't built in a boardroom. It was built from my own experiences and needs. I got tired of tools that didn't actually work, or platforms that look outdated, hard to navigate, don't have all the tools I needed, and somehow were outrageously expensive. So I decided to create something better. Riversites gives you a professional, modern website. But more importantly, it gives you the tools to actually run your office. It's customizable, it looks great, and you're never left on your own. You get real one-on-one support every step of the way. But Riversites goes far beyond just a website. You can track all your cases in one place, auto-assign case numbers, follow timelines without missing a beat, store your files securely, use built-in appointment scheduling, and even host your meetings all from one easy-to-use system. Best part, it's extremely affordable. How do I know? Because I built this platform from my own experience, and I made sure every union could afford the tools they need to run their office the way your members deserve, because your members deserve the best, and so do you. And here's the thing, Riversites isn't just for unions. We built websites for any business, big or small. Whether you're a shop owner, a nonprofit, a service provider, or a community leader, we've got your back. As a way to support the cause, we're offering an extra 10% off any multi-year plan when you use the code FIGHTFORRIGHTS. Just go to our website at riversitehub.com/fightforrights and schedule your free consultation today. That is again, riversitehub.com/fightforrights. Let's build something powerful together. This is something really important I want to touch into. Some workers say, and that they feel targeted at the moment they request a reasonable accommodation. Now, with all these new layers of review, it kind of feels like a trap, right? Are we seeing, or are we worried that RAs, the RA process is being used, or maybe potentially used as a backdoor to question somebody's fitness for duty.
Absolutely. What the answer is 100% yes. That happens a lot. That happened before January 2025. Again, that's one that maybe have I seen an uptick or is it worse now? I think so. I think people are a little more brazen with that kind of stuff, but it was a serious problem even under the last administration. That's not a political issue. That's a civil rights issue, and that um, they've used the RA process to get rid of people to say, oh, well, we denied the RA, so you're medically unfit for duty, and we're gonna remove you. Um, however, it's and so yeah, and so they'll fire people and people will be without a job because they requested RA and didn't get it and they couldn't find alternative work and they're fired. But actually, and a lot of people don't question it. So they're able to get a lot of people fired from this way. But actually, you're not supposed to fire somebody for medical inability to perform unless, and the agency has the burden of proving this, that there's a nexus between the employee's medical condition and observed deficiencies so that that you can see from their medical condition that there's issues in their performance or conduct, or that a high probability that their condition may injure themselves or others. So that's the analysis and the burden that goes through, and that analysis needs to be done before you fire somebody, and B, if that person appeals that termination, whether they're arguing the EEOC process or an MSPB, the agency has the burden to prove that no, there's this nexus. What I found is that oftentimes these RAs are denied, and they're like, no, we're not really considering this. We're just going to deny it, say we can't find alternative work, and fire this person. What I've found is that um, they just automatically issue the letter saying we're firing you for medical inability to perform after the RA is denied, and there's no real analysis. And in fact, oftentimes the first time there's any consideration of those factors, it's when I'm asking the questions at the hearing or the deposition. That's the first time they're even considering that. So, no, it's a serious problem. And if that's something, that's why I really encourage people to get an attorney and talk to your union rep when you're going through this process to help protect yourself from that and be ready if that happens. The other thing I want to say, another mistake, a huge mistake I see, that there's what we just talked about. They're really just using it as an excuse to wrongfully fire somebody and get away with it. The second part is people think like they need to have their doctor write out that they can't barely do anything. And I call it RAing yourself out of a job. So you had your doctor write stuff that was so restrictive that you literally can't perform the essential functions of your job. Your doctor's like, they can't work here or they're going to injure themselves unless they're on telework. But you actually have a job that literally the essential function of the job is like, you know, can't be done via telework. And I know we keep using the easy excuse like you're treating patients, but maybe it's something else. You're not a nurse or a doctor treating patients, but it's something else and you have to be in person and you have a doctor write something saying you can't be there in person. You just RA'd yourself out of a job.
Yeah, you're making yourself sound like you can't work at all. Like you're unhireable. And people have to realize that the agency looks at that, and if they can argue that you can no longer do your work, they will try to, like you said, they will try to RA you out of the job.
That's why talk to your union rep, talk to an attorney. You don't want the doctor to write something so crazy that it RAs yourself out of a job. That's that's always my concern. So that's a huge concern. The second part to that is when they actually can do their job with the RA, like I said, and they don't do that analysis that they might injure themselves and there's no performance deficiencies and they just automatically fire somebody. So the knife cuts both ways. And I really try to help people prevent yourself from being RA'd out of a job. But also there are ways to attack this medical unfitness for duty, which oftentimes the actual standard they don't consider till I'm asking them the question. So
Right. People be surprised. A lot of people kind of just believe that they've done their due diligence and they're making sure that they're evaluating and they've considered all the things to make sure that you really aren't. Your RA can't be. It should be denied this and that. And really, people reach out to your union, reach out to an attorney, make sure, right, that you have somebody on your side that really has your best interest, right? Because sometimes these people that they're just going through them like crazy. The papers are flying like bullets left and right, and they're just either approving or denying without even considering all the factors that go into
The
this.
reasonable accommodations coordinator is not your friend. Sorry, they're not. They work for the agency. They're paid by the agency. They are talking with management. They're not your friend in getting an RA. It's really unfortunate, but that's the case.
Right, and it's a sad reality, but it's a reality we live in, unfortunately. Now, for those that are listening who are union reps or maybe employees going through this, and I know this episode might get an influx of people watching it because it is such a big issue, and it is one of the main questions I get every single day when I'm in the office. Typically, I'll have one or two calls about this very same issue. Some may be facing the same issue, but most feel lost because of the control, right? And this is one of the main issues: is the control that the agencies have over reasonable accommodations. Andrew, what are some of the steps we can take to push back or protect federal employees that are going through this?
Well, I think one of the main things is what we just already talked about, is that you're making sure again, it's the number one issue I see is people go and get their doctor to write all sorts of stuff, which like literally indicates they can't do their job. So, and I've helped people with that, where before I was involved, they had their doctor do that. They lost their job. We're saying, the doctor wrote that, but they could still do their job. And then we're making whatever arguments we got to make. We got to point to the performance reviews. They've had great performance reviews. There were no performance deficiencies. I don't care, but that makes my job harder, ultimately costs the person more money. So I think the number one thing is like, make sure you're being truthful and make sure you're being truthful with your doctor always. Like, I understand if you really can't do these things, you really can't do them. But if you really can't perform the essential functions of your job, you really might not get the RA and you really might get fired. And there really might not be anything I can do for you. So be very, very careful when you're having a doctor write out what your limitations are.
This opens up a different question. Sorry to interrupt you, Andrew, but
Oh no, go for it. Yeah.
Now once people submit these papers out to the agencies, is there a way that the doctors come back and say, well, I've reconsidered, and they may do certain things? Like, is this something they can reconsider and resubmit, or once it's been submitted, that's it? They can't go back on it? Because it really sounds like it's a big problem. Once they submit this, the agency can come back and say, well, what changed now? How serious is your condition that now all of a sudden it changed?
Well, I think that I've actually talked with employees who their managers didn't want them to be fired, and their managers told them, hey, go get another sheet. Just go get like your doctor to fill another sheet out saying you can do this, this, and this, that way you won't get fired. So no, I think you're able to do that, and I think conditions change, and I think you're able to talk with your doctor. It's still bad evidence, right? Because I've had people who had subsequent letters saying exactly what they could and couldn't do. And then at hearing, the agency keeps pointing to this earlier letter before I was involved, and where the employee didn't know what they were doing, where literally the doctor was like, yeah, they can't do hardly anything telework. And then it was like, well, no, oh, no, like that's like, because we're asking for partial telework because we're acknowledging they need to come in 3 days of work to do the in-person portions of their job. And we're only asking for 2 days of telework, which might, whatever the condition is, especially for certain physical and mental conditions, even 2 days of telework can be really beneficial on someone's physical health who has back problems or things like that, right? Or whatever it is, even if it's a mental health issue, right? So, um, yeah, you are able to go back and do it. It's preferable you get it right the first time. right? That's always the preference. But I understand that for union reps, you're often being come to when there's an issue and it's it's like, oh, it's too late, you already submitted the doctor's note. And I've had people complain, well, my union rep told me to get another note. And I'm like, well, I mean, your union rep is really just trying to save your job. That's your union rep's job. And you do kind of have some really restrictive stuff here. Now we're arguing how you're able to do your job on telework. Uh, like, you know what I mean? Because so yes. So, but essentially, you can go back and you can get a doctor to fill out another note that might be less restrictive.
Right. It's not preferable, but it's something that they can do, especially, if like, and you said it beautifully, some conditions do change, not our conditions do change over time. And, last year I might've been worse than this year. So, different conditions can change and your needs do change over time as well. So, it's something, hopefully, people get it right the first time. Sometimes the doctors can also go overboard, and some people might not review the whole thing and they just submit it. And then they find out, oh, hold on, this is way too restrictive to what I thought, that my doctor was,
The doctors want to help and they think they're helping, and I don't ever think anyone's being untruthful. That's not what we're talking about. But I think that it's having a full communication and information of what's needed or not needed or really should be a restriction, right?
Right. So point to the case, don't sell yourself out of a job. Just try to make sure it's as clear and try to make it that so that you can do your job. And if you really need the telework, you really cannot make it to a physical location. It has to be for a really good and valid reason. Like Andrew said, doctors do look out and they try to help out people. And I really doubt the doctors will lie when they're making these reasonable accommodations. But doctors often don't really know the full details that a job would entail. And they think, well, if he needs to go to work, then it's better than he doesn't go physically. And when some people may be able to, maybe 1 or 2 days a week, things like that.
And the job search as an alternative accommodation is a lot rougher now than it was a year ago, and it wasn't great a year ago. And in fact, if I've seen emails where people were matched up with a job and then the new manager found out it was because of a reasonable accommodation. They're like, oh, actually, I don't think that they'd be a good fit. You have to, oh, da, da, da. And yeah, I'm litigating that. And yeah, you can lawyer up and litigate that, but that's not the place you want to be in. You'd rather just get the alternative job or be able to continue working your job. That's always, of course, the preference. You don't want to be in a position where you're hiring me. Like in a perfect world, you never have to hire me because you're not getting fired because you asked for RA. Unfortunately, that's not the reality, though, right?
Right. Now, I do want to clarify something important for all of our VA employees, because I know this is affecting a lot of our VA employees, and who might be wondering where the union contract stands in this issue. Our collective bargaining agreement does address telework. It outlines how telework should be requested, what the procedures are, how supervisors expect are expected to handle those issues. But here's the key point: our collective bargaining agreements do not guarantee telework, and this is something very important that people need to understand. And it is that they are not entitled to telework. Right? Telework is something that you may qualify for. But right now it's something that must be approved under this climate. It certainly needs to be approved under a reasonable accommodation, but management ultimately has a decision, or maybe not management, HR probably at this point, and to a higher level, because it will go to a higher level. They will ultimately have the discretion to either grant or deny it. What the CBA does provide is a framework, a process that's supposed to be fair, consistent, and free of discrimination. So while the contract won't force management to say yes to telework, it does give us a tool to challenge some denials that seem unfair, retaliatory, or inconsistent with past practices. So I just wanted to lay that out there because I know some people may have some questions about, it can get a little confusing between the law and what the CBA says in regards to hoping. Some people may hope that our collective bargaining agreements may force agencies to give them telework. It is not an entitlement as far as our collective bargaining agreement under, at least for the VA. So, at the end of the day, this isn't just about telework. It's about access. It's about whether the VA, an agency that employs tens of thousands of disabled veterans, is going to stand by its commitment to inclusion or create policy that quietly pushes people out. This new guidance may look neutral on the surface, but for people living through it, it means more than paperwork. It means more scrutiny, more barriers just to keep doing their job they've already proven they can do. So if you're a federal worker facing this, don't go through it alone. Know your rights, document everything, and reach out to your union or legal advocate, because access to work shouldn't be a fight, and yet here we are. Andrew, thank you again so much for being here today with us and sharing your insight. Where can people find your work?
Well, the best way is to hop on my website, legaljusticeatwork.com, legaljusticeatwork.com. All my contact information is on there. All Whitney's contact information, who's a former agency counsel herself before she started working with me. Dealt with this a lot on the other end, so good insight. And you can also just schedule on Calendly a meeting with us via the website. So that's the best way to get a hold of me is via the website.
Great. So we'll put all that information under the description down below as well. So again, Andrew, thank you so much. It's always fun to have you here, brother.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Danny. Keep up the good work. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to everyone that's listening, if this episode resonated with you, help us keep the conversation going. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so we can keep shining a light where others would rather keep things in the dark. We'll catch you on the next time. God bless. And remember, we are not giving up.